Imagine your own mother, forcing you to choose. Obey her, or watch your sister die. This is not a movie. This actually happened. In a quiet home in California, a woman turned her children into prisoners, then into accomplices. And what they were forced to do is one of the most disturbing family crimes ever recorded. But here's the part that shocked investigators the most. The children didn't run. They didn't tell anyone. They stayed and helped her. How does something like that even happen? Today, we're breaking down the real case of a mother who didn't just destroy her family. She controlled them completely. Inside that house, fear wasn't occasional. It was constant. The children learned very quickly that survival depended on one thing: obedience. Not respect. Not love. Just obedience. And Teresa Knorr made sure of it. Punishments were no longer just about discipline. They became unpredictable. Sometimes it was physical. Sometimes psychological. But the worst part, the children never knew when it was coming. Over time, Teresa created an environment where her children were completely isolated. They had little contact with outsiders. No safe adult to confide in. No one to question what was happening. And when you remove outside voices, one voice becomes everything. Hers. She decided what was right, what was wrong, who was to blame. And slowly, the children stopped questioning her. Among the children, one daughter began to receive the harshest treatment. Susan Knorr. At first, it wasn't obvious why. But according to later testimony, Susan became a focus of Teresa's anger. Accusations started. Blame. Punishments that went far beyond anything normal. And then, things escalated. The abuse became more severe. Food was restricted. Movement was controlled. Punishments lasted longer. This wasn't discipline anymore. This was torture. And the other children were forced to watch it happen. Not just watch, but accept it. Because speaking up wasn't an option. If you're watching this and thinking, why didn't anyone step in? You're not alone. Drop a comment, I want to hear your thoughts. At some point, Susan's condition became critical. She was weak, injured, barely able to function. And still, the abuse didn't stop. Instead of helping her, Teresa made a decision that crossed a line forever. According to court records, Susan Knorr died as a result of prolonged abuse inflicted inside that home. But what happened after her death is what truly shocked investigators. Because this wasn't treated as a tragedy. It was treated as a problem to solve. Instead of reporting the death, Teresa turned to her children. She ordered them to help. Not suggested. Not asked. Ordered. They were forced to participate in disposing of their sister's body. Think about that for a second. Children. Forced to handle something no adult should ever face. This is the part many people struggle to understand. Why didn't they run? Why didn't they tell someone? The answer lies in control. By this point, they were isolated. They were afraid. They believed disobedience meant death. And most importantly, they believed there was no escape. After the body was disposed of, life didn't return to normal. Because normal didn't exist anymore. There was no grieving. No acknowledgement. No closure. Just silence. And that silence made one thing clear. This could happen again. Instead of stopping, the situation became even more dangerous. Because once a line is crossed, it becomes easier to cross it again. And inside that house, fear had already replaced morality. If you're still here, hit like. It really helps push stories like this out. Another daughter soon became the focus. Sheila Noor. Like Susan before her, Sheila began facing extreme punishment. But this time, the situation escalated faster. Because now, Teresa had already done the unthinkable once. Reports revealed that Sheila was subjected to severe physical punishment, extreme control, isolation similar to her sister. But there was something different this time. The other children already knew what could happen. At this stage, fear wasn't just controlling their actions. It controlled their thoughts. They had seen what happened to Susan. They knew what Teresa was capable of. And that knowledge kept them silent. Eventually, Sheila Noor also died as a result of the abuse. 2 daughters. Same home. Same person responsible. But once again, there was no report. After the second death, the situation inside the house reached a level that's hard to comprehend. Because now, the children had witnessed 2 deaths. They had been forced to participate in cover-ups. And they were still under the control of the same person. This wasn't just abuse anymore. It was complete psychological domination. At this point, the children were no longer just victims in the eyes of the law. They had been forced into roles they didn't choose. Helping. Hiding. Staying silent. But it's important to understand. They didn't do this out of choice. They did it out of fear. But control like this doesn't last forever. Eventually, something starts to break. For one of the children, the fear slowly turned into something else. Doubt. Questions. And finally, the realization that this couldn't continue. After years of silence, one of the surviving daughters would eventually come forward. And when she did, everything started to collapse. The secrets, the lies, the control, all of it. Because once the truth started coming out, there was no stopping it. And what investigators would uncover next would expose one of the most disturbing family crimes ever recorded. For years, the truth stayed buried. Not because it didn't exist, but because fear kept it hidden. Inside that house, silence had become survival. But silence like that doesn't last forever. Eventually, someone breaks. And in this case, it was one of the daughters who had lived through it all. Terry Noor. She had seen everything, experienced everything, and carried it for years. But over time, the fear that once controlled her began to weaken. And something else took its place. The need to tell the truth. By the time Terry was older, she was no longer physically trapped in the same way she had been as a child. But mentally, the control still lingered. That's the thing about long-term abuse. Even when you leave, it doesn't leave you. Still, she reached a point where staying silent felt worse than speaking out. And that decision changed everything. Terry eventually contacted authorities. What she told them was hard to believe. Not because it sounded impossible, but because it sounded too disturbing to be real. She described years of abuse, the deaths of her sisters, the forced involvement in covering it up. At first, investigators had to verify everything, because cases like this require evidence. And what they found matched her story. Once the report was made, law enforcement began building a case. They revisited timelines, tracked locations, looked into missing persons reports connected to the family. And slowly, the full picture started coming together. 2 daughters. Both gone. No official reports. No records of what really happened. Until now. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered physical evidence that supported Terry's statements. Locations where remains had been disposed of. Details that only someone involved could have known. And piece by piece, the case became undeniable. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a confirmed crime. With enough evidence gathered, authorities moved in. Teresa Knorr was arrested. For the first time in years, the person who had controlled everything was no longer in control. The woman who had ruled through fear was now facing justice. The case shocked everyone who heard it. Because it wasn't just about murder. It was about control, manipulation, psychological domination. People struggled to understand how something like this could happen for so long, without anyone stepping in. But that's the reality of cases like this. They often stay hidden. Until someone finds the strength to speak. When the case went to court, the details became even more disturbing. Prosecutors laid out the timeline. Years of abuse. The death of Susan Knorr. The death of Sheila Knorr. The forced involvement of the other children. Each piece of evidence painted the same picture. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't self-defense. It was sustained, intentional harm. One of the most powerful moments in the trial came from the testimony of the surviving children. They described what life inside that house was really like. The fear, the control, the punishments, and the impossible choices they were forced to make. Their words gave the court something more than evidence. They gave it reality. The defense attempted to challenge parts of the story, but the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple testimonies, consistent timelines, physical findings. Everything pointed in the same direction. And in cases like this, consistency matters. After reviewing everything, the court reached its decision. Teresa Knorr was found guilty. The charges reflected the severity of the crimes. 2 daughters lost their lives. Other children were permanently affected. And the responsibility traced back to one person. The sentence was clear. Life in prison. A final outcome for years of abuse, control, and violence. For the first time, there was accountability. But even with the sentence, the impact didn't disappear. Because cases like this don't end in the courtroom. They continue in the lives of those who survived. The children had to rebuild their lives, process what they went through, and find a way to move forward. After years of being controlled, this case leaves behind something deeper than just facts. It raises questions. How does someone gain that level of control? How does fear become stronger than reality? And how many similar situations go unnoticed, even today? If you've made it this far, subscribe for more real, detailed true crime stories. Because these stories don't just inform. They reveal how far human behavior can go. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a crime. It was a story about control, about fear, and about what happens when the people meant to protect you become the ones you need protection from. She reshaped them permanently. And the most chilling part, it all happened behind closed doors. 4 years. Without anyone knowing. Because sometimes, the most dangerous place is the one that's supposed to feel like home.